I'm Gareth Everson, and on today's episode, we're going to be talking about a common problem for solo business owners, and that's how do you manage sales meetings and how do you turn yourself into being good at sales when you have no sales experience. This is one of the most common concerns that small business owners have when they start their business. If they've never ever worked in sales before, if they've never had to sell their services in the past, this can be a nagging doubt about how you're going to be when you start up in business. And perhaps even if you've been running your business a while, perhaps it's still one of those nagging doubts that you tell yourself that you've got, when in actual fact there are some very simple ways to overcome those problems. What you're going to learn and understand by the end of this episode is that sales is actually just another process, and it's actually a process that once you understand how you can do it more effectively, can be a really enjoyable process. But we need to move away from this feeling that it's a very alpha and a very aggressive type part of your business to actually one where you're more of a listener and you are helping your clients or your prospects, as they are at that time, to solve the problems that they have. There are actually a lot more softer skills to sales than you perhaps imagine. And on this episode, we're going to be talking about the sales process, specifically around the sales meeting, in 3 different stages. We're going to be talking about the run-up to the sales meeting. We're going to be talking about the meeting itself, and then also what you do to close the sale or follow up from that sales meeting. So we'll be taking it in those 3 stages. As always with our episodes, there's more on this on our website. If you go to solopreneur.com/EP11, you'll be able to find the show notes and a blog write-up of this particular topic. There'll also be some questions on there for you to start to think about how you might manage your sales process more effectively and more in tune with how you are as a character and the problems that you solve for your clients. Let me start with an admission. I'm not what you would classify as a traditional sales expert. I'm no sales guru. I've had no formal sales training. I've been in business though since 2007. And actually, thinking back to when I started my first business, I had many of the feelings that many of the clients that I now work with feel about sales. Because I had no experience, because I'd had no training in it, I told myself that I wasn't going to be great at, either marketing or sales. And for that reason, when I left corporate life in 2007, I made the decision to do so when our first child, my son, was 3 months old, and I was working away from home and missing out on his early weeks and months of development. I decided that I was going to leave the corporate environment. But because I was unsure about what it took to start and grow a business, I joined a franchise. Now, if you've ever been part of a franchise, one of the big selling points of joining a franchise is that whilst you run your own business, you're never in business on your own. There's always a community or a group or a support network for you to help you to be able to run that business. And any good franchise is all about the training and about the processes that they teach you. That's their IP. And the franchise that I joined was no different in that regard. It was what you describe as a white collar franchise. It was a consulting one. And the first 6 or 7 weeks were all about teaching you about the operational processes, the marketing processes, the sales, the delivery processes that went around running a franchise or running a business in their franchise. And actually what I learned, I'd always been very process oriented. I've come from a technology background. I worked on large technology programs in corporate life. So the process angle of it was very appealing to me. And it was something that I was able to follow very quickly and then tweak around how I might make improvements further to the training that I received. But actually sales was still, until I started going and meeting prospects and having conversations with them, sales was always one of those areas that I was most fearful of. Not least because if you can't make sales, then you can't really run a business, especially if you're running a company of one where you're the expert and you're responsible for the marketing, the sales, and then delivery of work with your clients. So it was always something that was right at the back of my mind that I was nervous about. But actually, when you break it down, sales is really about getting to the truth of a prospect's challenges and about understanding the problems that they're experiencing and then playing back to them how your expertise or your services or your products that you have can help them overcome those problems. And actually, rather than being a very alpha environment and a very pushy environment, which sales is often seen as, being good at sales in an expert business is actually more about your ability to ask great questions and to listen and to play back to that client how they can solve the problems that they have, specifically how they can solve the problems that they have by using you and your services. So I want to give you confidence that actually, even if you've run your business for a while and you're still nervous about sales or those sales meetings, if you follow certain specific processes, you can overcome a lot of the fear that you have around managing the sales process, managing the sales meeting process, closing new clients into your business, and actually becoming really effective at it. And we're going to break that down into those three process areas: the before, the during, and the after the sales meeting. Let's talk about the first process, before the sales meeting. This covers all of those activities between booking a sales meeting in your diary, or somebody booking a sales meeting in your diary, and the point where you sit down, whether virtually or physically, to talk to them in that sales meeting context. I have lots and lots of clients who will say that one of their biggest problems in their business is that they don't have enough time to manage all of the leads that they have met with and had sales meetings with to turn them into clients. And without wanting to stereotype, this is a really common problem with male business owners. And I think the reason for that is that the male psyche, by contrast to the female psyche, is very much one of, how do we progress this? How do we move this forward? How do we keep momentum happening? And one of the challenges that if you are facing this in your business, whether you're male or female, one of the things that I want to challenge you first of all on the pre-meeting process is, are you offering people a meeting with you too early in the process? Episode 3 and subsequent episodes to that talked about the 3 different stages of the sales funnel: top of funnel, middle of funnel, bottom of funnel. And I seem to talk about it on every single episode. But if you're finding yourself having too many sales meetings and not turning enough, in inverted commas, of those sales meetings into clients, I would challenge you that perhaps you're having meetings with people too early in that process. So that's the first thing to bear in mind with regards to the before the sales meeting process. But assuming that you're inviting people at the right stage, so when they're getting towards the end of the middle of the funnel, or certainly the bottom of the funnel stage, to book time with you and book those sales appointments with you, what I want to encourage you to do is to allow some buffer between the time that they're booking that meeting, so that the point where they go online to book that appointment with you, and the time that you conduct that meeting with them. And the reason I'd like you to do that is that then it gives you some breathing space, some freedom, if you like, to prepare them for that meeting. And there's a couple of things that I want you to think about by way of your pre-meeting process with them. So let's assume you don't allow them to book a sales meeting with you that's, let's say for argument's sake, less than 3 or 4 days out. What I want you to do in that time is warm them up to that meeting with what I would describe as an FAQ or SAQ email process. FAQ, everybody understands, the frequently asked questions. SAQ is my preferred term, and that's the should ask questions. If you can put in front of your meeting prospect some of the things that are common questions that people have had in the past, or when we think about the should ask, some of the things that would naturally trip up people who know that they have a problem, know that they want to solve it, but don't quite know how to do so and don't quite know how to go about hiring somebody to help with those problems. Those are the kind of topics that you might cover in those should ask questions. So try and, in the build up to that sales meeting, have at least 2 or 3 emails that are going to them that prepare them for that meeting with a smattering of FAQs and SAQs to help them think about and help them frame how they might think about addressing the problems that they have with you. That does 2 things. It helps focus their minds and attention when they get to the sales meeting, and it also, importantly, helps build trust in their mind that you know what you're talking about, that you are being open and honest enough with them to share some of the problems, the challenges, the issues that they might face when they're addressing some of these problems with you. So that trust factor is a big and an important thing in this. To give this some context, let me tell you how I manage this in my own business. So I help people, as you know, with understanding marketing and sales process and helping them to systemize those processes in their business using software, using technology. One of the big challenges I face in order to help people to do that is that I run my own business on my own. I don't have unlimited resources to help clients and provide time to clients to do all of these things. And it's in my interest, and it's in those clients' interest, to understand enough about the concepts and how this gets done so that they can manage this on their own moving forward. So one of the should ask questions that I always put in front of people who either want to book a meeting with me or who have booked a meeting with me, one of the things that I want to frame with them is an expectation that there'll be a learning process with this, and there'll be an activity sequence that they'll have to manage themselves in order to ensure that these systems and processes run effectively in their business. They're not, in other words, buying an outsourced marketing systems solution from me. That would be the worst scenario in the world. I could only work with 5 to 10 clients if I was managing my business in that way. So one of the should ask questions that I pose to prospects who book a meeting with me is, are they committed to learning and doing and managing these systems and processes in their business once they've learned how to do them from me? That's one of the key SAQs that I will pose to prospects who book time with me. So in that context, try and think about how, when you provide services to your clients, are there common things that come up in working with your clients that you can include, that you can seed in that conversation in their mind before they've even met you? Because if you're able to do that in advance of the sales meeting, it will make the sales meeting more effective. But more importantly, if they do become a client, the expectations that they have of what they need to do and what you'll be doing for them will be far more in line with how things will pan out afterwards. It helps prevent that cliff drop moment of, if they think they're getting something and they actually get something different, you'll prevent that from happening, and you'll move them more effectively towards that positive endorsement further down the line that what you have delivered has been against the expectations that they had from the outset. There's another piece that I'd like you to think about prior to the sales meeting as well, and it's this. I'd like you to think about, in that warm-up process where you're sending them information in relation to those FAQs and those SAQs, I'd also like you to seriously think about sharing with them a plan for the meeting, an agenda for the meeting, if you like. It doesn't have to go into an nth degree of detail around that meeting, but what I want you to do is frame a structure on your terms for what that meeting will do. Now, we'll come on to the meeting structure in a moment, but have that thought in your mind about seeding with them an agenda for that meeting. It does two things. It positions you as having thought through the process and looking professional about what that process is that they're going to come into, but it also helps you to preempt in their mind any sort of questions, any sort of doubts that they might have as well. That agenda will show to them that there'll be room for them in there to ask any questions that they have and respond to questions that you have about their business as well. So that might sound like a lot to do in advance of the meeting, but if you automate some of this stuff in your business and do it once and do it well and do it consistently, so that everybody that books time in your diary receives this countdown sequence in the run-up to the meeting, you'll find that it takes away any pressure for you to open the meeting and cover all of those points, but B, it will prepare them that the meeting that they've booked with you in a few days' time is going to be productive and going to be valuable to them in terms of starting to get answers for the problems that they have. So let's think about the sales meeting process itself. You've warmed them up in advance of that meeting. You've looked professional. You've given them insights into what that meeting is going to cover. You've reminded them that the meeting's coming up, so that the chances of them not showing up or being a no-show are far reduced from what they would be if you hadn't sent reminders. You've basically built this picture of what the meeting is going to be in their mind. So when you jump online with them or you meet them face to face, the start of that meeting, it can flow a lot more effectively than it otherwise would do if they were coming into the meeting without any expectations at all. But that's not to say that when you open that meeting that you shouldn't do certain things. And one of the key things to do is to be engaging, to show interest in that person, to reiterate what you both expect from the meeting, and to show them that you've listened to them when they book the meeting and what they've told you in advance of that meeting, so that you've got that clear perspective of why you're both there in the room and how you can perhaps help them. So that's really important in terms of setting the right tone for the meeting. You should also reiterate especially if you've sent them an agenda in advance, you should also reiterate what your plan for the meeting is by way of that agenda, and invite them to add anything or take anything out of that agenda so that they also feel in control as well. That's a really important part of that process of opening the meeting, continuing that flow and that expectation and that process that you've started in the run up to the meeting. So once we start the meeting and we're down to business, the most important process when you're in a sales meeting is about how you gather information from that prospect. And this all comes down to two things: how you ask questions and the kind of questions that you're asking about the problems that they face, asking them intelligently and thoughtfully, but also then sitting back and listening to their answers. The key part of the sales process is helping your prospect to feel confident and that they've got that level of trust in you that they can explain to you in their words what their problems are. The biggest part of the sale is them feeling that they can open up to you about the challenges that they face. In their mind, they'll be creating an emotional connection with you, which is the first part of the buying process, when they feel that they've got that confidence and that trust to be able to explain in their words what their problems are, and that they've got an ear that's listening to them intently about what those problems are. Much of what we face when we have challenges or problems can be overcome by just sharing that with somebody. And so how you gather information and insight from your prospect is probably the key to this whole sales process. So think about the questions that you'll ask them about the problems that they face. Think about how you respond when they tell you those things. You don't have to solve those problems immediately. The gathering part of the sales meeting is all about building up a picture and a perspective of where that prospect feels that they're facing challenges, that they're facing problems that they want to have resolved in their life. So two keys here: be a good listener and be able to then relay back to them what you've understood and what you've heard from the challenges that they face. Because if they feel like they're being listened to, and if they have that confidence and that trust in you, that tipping point of where they're almost in their mind making an emotional decision before they make that logical decision to work with you, that is the key to sales meeting success. Once you've built up that rapport, once you've built up that understanding, once you've built up that grasp of what their problems are as part of that gathering process in your sales meeting, then you can start to relay back to them and present back to them how you've understood what those problems are. And when you do that, one of the great ways of helping them continue to build trust that you're the person to solve those problems is to intertwine examples from existing clients that you have. Now, you don't necessarily have to name names in that process if you don't feel that that's appropriate. However, telling the stories of how you've helped other clients will definitely continue to build that trust in their minds in you. So presenting back to them after you've gathered the information around their problems is a key bridge to them being able to make a decision in their own minds, perhaps an emotional decision before you've asked them that you're the right person to help them with their problems. Now, once you've presented back to them and you've had any discussion around your understanding of their challenges and their problems, do ask them specifically, have I understood your challenges correctly? And has my summary correctly reflected the challenges that you face? This will help you surface if there are any other underlying issues that they haven't yet told you about. They'll be confident at this stage if you've listened intently and if you've relayed back to them the kind of problems that they have in a full and understanding type way. This will help them build further confidence to perhaps tell you about any other underlying problems that might relate to this. And perhaps they might have picked up on some of the stories that you've told about other clients, some of the other case studies that you've relayed to them. It might make them actually reflect on their own situation and think, oh yeah, actually that applies to me as well, and tell you that. So presenting back to them and making any adjustments to your understanding with them is a key part of closing off that kind of gathering and that presenting part of the sales meeting. If you do all of these things effectively and successfully, bearing in mind it's the intelligent questions that you ask and how you listen to their responses, the level of trust that they have in you will be beyond any level of trust that you've experienced before if you've never managed your sales meetings with this kind of process in mind. By contrast, if you're not doing these things, if you're not taking these steps as part of the sales meeting, and all you're doing is basically gathering information to present to them a price or a structure of how you work, that turns the sales meeting a lot more into more of a transactional process. We want to turn that sales meeting into one of trust and of empathy and of understanding and of belief in their mind that you're the right person to solve their problems. It might also be an opportunity for you to qualify out any prospects that aren't necessarily right for your service. If you get a response to some of your questions that is cold or offhand or closes down the conversation, that person's probably not going to be the right type of client for you down the line. They'll be problematic. If they're not sharing and open with you about where their challenges lie, you'll find it difficult. If you find it difficult in the sales process, you'll find it 10 times harder to deliver results for them that meet those expectations that they have. So use it as an opportunity for you to qualify out prospects that shouldn't be working with you as well. So then let's think about the final part of the process, how you move that meeting from one of discussion and unearthing the challenges and problems that your prospect faces into one where you're actually turning the conversation into a, look, we can help you with this and it will cost X amount. The closing phase, if you like. Now, if it's appropriate in the meeting to present to them a potential solution with outline costings for what that might take so that they can make a decision there and then in the meeting with you, then that's great. If you got a more complex offer and you need to go away and think about it, we'll also cover that as well. But let's focus on the first part of it, where within the realms of the meeting, based on what you've gathered from them and understood to them and agreed with them are their challenges and their problems, and you've put an association with being able to solve those problems with a success outcome in their mind. If you're able to do that as part of the meeting, actually asking for the sale becomes just a logical conclusion to the meeting. You'll get a sense when you've gathered and presented back and adjusted those thoughts based on the two-way interaction that you have with them. You'll get a feel for having unearthed everything that you need to as part of that sales meeting. There'll come a logical point in that sales meeting where you can say to that prospect, well, that sounds fantastic that we've unearthed all of these things and that we know that there are potential solutions for addressing these challenges that you're facing, and I know that we can help you to do that. How would you like to move forward? That's all you need to ask. How would you like to move forward? Or you can say, so what are the next steps on this? And then that gives you an indication of whether they're happy for you to then say to them what that's going to cost them. They'll invite you to quote them for those activities. It might be a verbal quote. You might have to go away and make a written quote for that. But if you've summarized everything that's going on in their world and their problems that they have, and they're fully in agreement with that, simply being able to say to them, so how would you like to move this forward? Or so what happens next? Words to that effect that are just a gentle move into the next part of the meeting, the closing part of the meeting, is a nice way to bridge those two things and start to bring the meeting to a close. It's at that stage where if they do say, well, how can we work together? You can either present to them a series of options, or you can say at that stage, actually, I just need to collate my thoughts and prepare for you what that might look like by way of a quote, and go away and think about that. That's entirely up to you, based on how complex your services are for them. But you can decide based on them having answered that simple question. So how would you like to move forward? So what happens next? Don't have any nervousness about asking that question about, so what happens next? Or so how would you like to move this forward? Or so what are your thoughts? And the reason why you shouldn't is that if you've got to this stage where you've unearthed what those challenges are in their lives, there's a lot more value to them in being able to solve those problems than there probably is in monetary value to you of them as a client. So actually, it's probably quite reassuring to them that you're moving the conversation towards one of, so how do we take this forward? That's all you need to do by way of, in inverted commas, closing the sale or closing the agreement to proceed with you. So if your service is simple enough to get an agreement there and then within the meeting and for you to present those options to them, great. If it's not, and with the information that you gathered, you need to go away and prepare for them some sort of quote or write-up summary of the services that you'll provide for them to solve their problems, that's where you need to draw the meeting to a close with that as your commitment. Now, it's important in this process, if you do need to go away and prepare something for them, that you're setting aside time very quickly after the meeting to prepare that for them. One of the biggest gaps I ever had when I got busy in my business as a technology and a marketing consultant for small business clients was not doing so, not preparing the time to be able to follow up on those meetings with a quick quote. When you don't do that, any positivity that you've had in that meeting around you being the solution to the problems that they have evaporates very quickly if you don't follow up in that same level of professionalism and empathy with them. And the longer you leave it between leaving that meeting and getting the quote to them, by which I mean, if you can do it within hours, great. If you can do it within a day, that's probably okay. But as it starts to go beyond that, doubts will quickly seep into their mind about whether that relationship with you is going to be as positive as it was in that sales meeting. So it's really important that if you are making a commitment to follow up with them, that you do so very quickly indeed. If you've met them face to face, if that means, dropping into Costa or McDonald's to write up a quote afterwards and get that to them, then do that and plan the time in to do that. But certainly don't leave your follow-up any longer than 24 hours. And if you can do it in the same day, even better, because you need to continue that same level of positivity that they've had with you in the meeting on an ongoing basis, because even if they do become a client, if you followed up a little bit later, there'll be those doubts in their mind about whether they've made the right decision. So follow-up is ever so important. If you leave the meeting without having agreed that you're going to work together and they need to think things through, and that can happen for any number of different reasons, then make sure that you have some degree of follow-up planned or scheduled to go to them. And a nice follow-up method is to follow up personally in the first instance, either the same day or the next day, and that's specifically tailored around the conversation that you've had. And then more automatically in subsequent days, drop them into a sequence of some of the common questions that people have after you've had a sales meeting with them. Now, that doesn't need to go on for months and months. It could be just a sequence of 2 or 3 emails that go out afterwards. But it's important that you present yourself in front of them if they haven't yet decided to buy from you after you come out of the meeting. So in summary, around this phase, the follow-up phase after the meeting, how you follow up and the tone that you use and the empathy that you show for their situation is as important in the follow-up as it was during the meeting and prior to the meeting. So make sure that you have that level of continuity and that level of professionalism and that consistency in all of your communications afterwards. Really importantly though, if you are automating a process of follow-up after the sales meeting, make sure that as soon as they do decide to become a client or have told you no that they don't want to be, either of those options is valid, that you remove them from that automation afterwards. Nothing presents a less professional outcome to them in their mind than continuing to get reminders or follow-ups when either they've said yes or they've said no. We'll talk about that new client onboarding experience in a later episode, but I just want to sow that seed here. So in terms of thinking about this concept as a whole, think about your sales meeting process as falling into 3 different sub-processes. 1, what happens before the meeting. 2, the engagement and the interactions and the gathering of information and presenting that information back to them as part of the sales meeting. And thirdly, doing what you say you're going to do as you leave the sales meeting after the meeting. So how you follow up from that sales meeting. 3 really simple but important processes for running your sales activities and your sales meetings. If you move more into being process oriented and structured around following a process, you'll definitely remove those demons that you have around not being good at sales. If you follow a process, even if you're not the best salesperson in the world, even if you're not the most empathetic person in the world, that will be far better than not following a process or being fluid and different every single time you show up for those sales meetings. If you want to see more insights on this, head over to solopreneur.com/EP11 and you'll be able to see the write-up on this episode. And if you've got any questions about this or about other topics, look me up on LinkedIn. If you go to askgareth.com, that will take you directly to my LinkedIn profile and let's have a conversation from there.